So I am here with Kerri Wise, who is the Chief Marketing Officer of AutoFi and the president and one of the founders of WOCAN, which is Women of Color in Automotive. Kerri, thank you so much for agreeing to do this with us. I'm excited.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So I'm so fascinated by your journey and everything that you've accomplished so far. Can you share a little bit about your early life story? Like, we want to know all about you.
Well, it's so interesting because when I think of myself as a kid, there's a lot of similarities to me today. Had a lot of energy. I'm a middle child, so one of four kids born and raised in San Jose, California. And as a middle child, I think you're always trying to grab attention, right? And so I was the one that was always performing in front of my parents and always trying to win the attention of everybody. Wasn't very shy. I just was a talker, talked your ear off. I was also an athlete. So from 7th to 12th grade, I was a three-sport athlete, played volleyball, basketball, and softball, and then went on to play basketball in college. But I think the athleticism and that focus on athletics really shaped who I am now too, because that competitive side is really what drives me, not just to win, but to be my best.
Yeah.
And that started, when I was really young. I think another aspect of growing up that impacted who I am today is that I was in a kind of alpha-oriented house. I had two brothers who I was sandwiched between. I had an older sister that was 10 years older.
Mhm.
And for me, I think I was very lucky to be in a household where my gender didn't really matter as much, that the girls were encouraged to compete in athletics. We were encouraged to fish, to get dirty, to do all the things that my brothers did as well. And so if you look at me and my sister, we're both kind of in male dominated industries. I'm in automotive. She was an engineer. And so I think that upbringing of being in a household of guys and a very alpha oriented household prepared me really to work in the automotive industry.
I love that. So my sister has twins, a boy and a girl, niece and a nephew. So they're not in a household full of guys, but she literally like raises them the same. She didn't believe in like pink and blue. They're like running barefoot on the farms, like doing boy stuff. My sister is such a tomboy
Yeah.
all the time, and I hope that that means that she grows up to be like super independent and like unaware of like, oh, I'm a girl, so that means I should do this or do that because, you know, we all know
Yeah.
that.
I don't remember feeling defined, right? Like even from
Mhm.
a race standpoint, I
Mhm.
grew up in California. And so I did things that were kind of like untraditional. I like going in the water and being at the beach, like the kind of California lifestyle. And so I don't remember just being defined by my identity as much as a child. And I credit that a lot to my parents, to the area that I was raised in the San Francisco Bay Area, of being free to be me.
Yeah, I love it. So last year with Women of Hudson, we did a series called Growing with Intention. And what I wanted to get out in front of everybody is so often like we wake up in life and we don't exactly know how we got to where we are, right? Like it just happened. None of it was intentional. And I believe that we are where we are today based on the decisions that we've made in the past. And that means that the decisions that we make today will define who we are in the future. And so there are things that we can do intentionally to move us in that direction that we want to go, right? We can be intentional with our habits and with our environment, with our pain and our failure, with our communication. We can be intentional in all those things. And so my question to you here is, was that ever the case for you that you woke up and you were like, I'm not sure how I got here? Or did you build your life intentionally?
Yeah, it's so funny because I typically will tell people that I'm not a huge planner. I'm not necessarily, the person that puts together the 5 or 10 year plan.
Mhm.
And because so many things have happened in my life organically, or people I've met, or opportunities have come in front of me, where I can't even imagine my life today and what I'm doing today. I couldn't even have imagined it 5 years ago, right? But that being said, I am more intentional than I give myself credit for.
Mhm.
I go back to like even my career in marketing and choosing that profession in college, I did a lot of research on what that profession entails, the good, the bad, the ugly. I remember I talked to somebody who was in the profession, so like I was very aware of like I need to know what this is before I choose this as a major. There's a quick story. I went to a school named Cal State Northridge, and we had a professor by the name of JD Power. Yeah, JD Power and Associates. He was an adjunct professor in our master's business program, and he just did it on the side while he ran JD Power and Associates. And that's how I ended up in automotive. I literally got an internship because I had a connection to JD Power doing marketing research for Honda. So I kind of fell into it. But I think one thing that I've been very intentional about is my network. And if I was to credit anything within my career, it's really choosing people that I want to learn from, people that I want to work with. Like that to me was the most important thing, and almost more important than the actual function I was doing. I remember I went from marketing research to sales at one point. Never thought of myself as a salesperson. I'm more of a relationship person than like a hunter. But there was somebody in the sales department that I really wanted to learn from. And so I applied for the job and ended up in sales for 2 years. And to me, that was more important, is the people that I'm working with that I can learn from, than even like the profession or function that I was doing at any given time.
I think that's so important. Actually, I have further down on my list, but I can move these questions up for you. So I have two questions about one, what does your inner circle look like, right? Because it is so important who you surround yourself with and who you put yourself in front of. And I think that goes back to being intentional about your environment, right? Your environment is not only a physical thing or place, but the people that you surround yourself with, the places that you go on a regular basis, things like that.
Yeah, my inner circle is very diverse. I think that's the way I would describe it. And I'm not just talking about, just gender and race and all that stuff. I mean, that is actually true, but just diverse in terms of backgrounds and how people think, because that to me is one of the most important things. If you look at my teams across the years, like I would win the award for most diversity, and most of my teams, even the people that work for me, once again, like coming from different perspectives and backgrounds. And so that's important to me, particularly when I'm hiring someone. Like I am not trying to hire myself. And I learned the hard way that as an extrovert, hiring a bunch of extroverts, we're not going to get anything done. we need a combination of some introverts that are very focused, that want to be on their own by themselves, in addition to extroverts. And so I think that's just an example of like, I try to surround myself with people that have different skill sets, different mindsets. With my friends, kind of similar, people that I can learn from, people that I can give back to. I think the biggest mistake people make within their network, one, is surrounding themselves with themselves. And I think most people make that mistake. But two, it's not being intentional about your network. It's being too transactional, meaning like, I want this person in my network because they can do something for me. They can mentor me, or they can get me a job. And what I've learned is that the people below me or my peers have been just as valuable as the mentors. I have a guy who was my intern, Brian, at JD Power, who was just an intern and now is an executive at Nike. So if I wanted to like work in sports, I mean, he would be my connection, and he was my intern years ago. Right.
Yeah.
So you just never know how people, where they're going to go, how they're going to grow, and how I'm going to learn from them, even if they are below me.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. So I found that sometimes like the word leader, especially for females or young females, is a little bit of a scary word. And I've definitely had them look at me and they're like, I'm not a leader, right? I don't have anybody reporting to me. This is not what I do, right? But I believe that the reality is that all of us are leaders in some aspect of our life, and that we all have the ability to make a difference in the world by leading the people around us, regardless of our role or title or position. It really boils down to influence. And what we're learning this year is, how do we build influence with people in different areas of our lives, right? And so I think building influence boils down to one, creating relationships with people and building relationships, making sure that they know that you care about them. And to your point, not only what they can do for you, and then adding value to the people around you. And so the way that I build relationships and the way that I add value to my boss or my supervisor looks different than the way that I do that with my peers or with the people that report up to me or look up to me, right? And so, as a leader in your industry, what do you think is the most important quality for a successful leader?
I mean, I think a leader does their best to understand the bigger picture, whether they're a boss of an organization or even whether they're not, even if as an individual contributor, you have some perspective, a unique perspective that you can lend to the organization. And so I think to me, being a leader is having some level of vision, no matter where you're at,
Mm-hmm.
and that you can use, as you mentioned, to add value to the organization. I remember being very entry level, and I could see things at my level that my boss couldn't see because they were too removed from it.
Mm-hmm.
And my job was to either bubble that up or to take action on that and to come up with some solutions to improve the situation. But I think we all have that opportunity to use our unique perspectives, our places within the organization to absolutely give back. And then you talk about from an influence standpoint, we all have a story, we all have a unique perspective where we can give back. I think about WOCAN. Until we started WOCAN a couple of years ago, I was just kind of navigating automotive on my own, not really understanding how powerful my own story was. I know it's kind of hard to believe, but like, I really didn't. I was just putting my head down and getting my work done. And as I started talking about my story, or as I started connecting with other women, they were asking me questions. I realized that, wow, like there's a need for this network,
Mm-hmm.
more of a need than I ever gave it credit for. We all have that opportunity to give back, whether it be creating a network or whether it be connecting with people within the organization so that we can use our own stories, our own perspectives to give back.
Yep, exactly. I think that's so important. You talked a little bit about like befriending and keeping people in your network that are from different backgrounds, different places.
Yeah.
And I say so often that we think that what is in front of us is the truth and the only reality, when I have something that is real and true to me because of my experiences, who I've met, where I've been, what I know. Whereas your reality and your truth is not the same, right? Like it can't go together, right? Like if this is real, then this can't be real, but that's so not the truth. And there's so many things that we can do. One is surrounding ourselves with people from many different backgrounds and different cultures, visiting different cultures, reading books, watching documentaries, but keeping an open mind all the time, not saying, well, this is what I know to be true. And so I'm not even going to look over here because I don't need that negativity. I don't want that in my
Yeah.
life. That's not my reality, right? And so I think that as we go through life, that's super important to remember.
Yeah.
So you aren't in middle management anymore, but but there was a time in your life when you were, and you talked a little bit about it, where at that time, so when you are in middle management or, not the top manager of a company, there are things that you see, like you said, that your boss can't see. They're not down there in the weeds with you. But the only way I think to be able to kind of relay that information back up to them and be credible is to like build that influence with them by creating those relationships to the point where they look at you and they trust what you say and they know that you have the organization's best interests at heart and you're not saying things because this is going to be the best thing for me or not for me. So what were some of the ways that you were able to make a difference being there as opposed to being
Yeah.
like, now you're at top level, there's a lot of things you can do, a lot more responsibilities you have.
Yeah, I think no matter what level you are in, being a student of the business, like continuously learning, exposing yourself to what's happening in your industry, in your line of work is really, really important. It's easy for us to kind of like be bogged down with the details of our job and lose the connection to like why it's important to our larger business, to the industry. And so to me, I've always been reading the automotive publications, trying to truly understand my client. I didn't sell cars at a dealer, but I'm working with dealers all the time. And so really understanding their day to day and what they do and how I can impact that. So I think how you get credibility, one, is continuous learning and being a student of the business, so that when you have an idea, you have the perspective of how it fits in with the organization, and you can sell your idea in a way that resonates with your boss.
Yeah.
I used to make the mistake, and I think many of us have, of like having your pet projects, things that you really care about and you're pushing it and you want your organization to do it, but you didn't really tie the value to the organization, to your pet project,
Yeah.
and why your boss should care. And I think having that perspective is really important in selling your value. I've also been honest with the managers that I work with. Like, I am definitely not the type of employee, or at any point in my career, that if we were running into a wall, smiled and said, that's okay, go ahead and run into that wall. As long as I collect my paycheck, I'm good. And there are people that are like that, right? That they don't necessarily take ownership of their career. It's just a check to them. And to me, I might as well die a slow death if I'm in a job in which it's just a check and I don't really care whether we fail or not. And so I think those moments where you could, in a professional way, provide just guidance, manage up. It really is about managing up and saying, look, I just want to kind of alert you to something, that concern I might have, or think we might be moving in the wrong direction here. You got to be very tactful depending on the level and the organization you're at. But I think when you do those kind of things, when I have employees that bubble things up to me, that manage up to me, it does cause me to trust them more.
Yeah.
Because now I know they have not only their best interest in mind, they have my best interest in mind. They have the organization's best interest in mind.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah.
When did you realize that you were a leader and that people were following you?
I feel like early on, I did feel like a leader, in that joining even the automotive industry as a woman of color, like, you're a trailblazer, like, on day one, because there's not as many of us. And so being one of the only ones in the room, being one of the few, you're naturally a leader, right? You might be the first, or you might be doing things that maybe no one else in your circles are doing. And so I guess, to answer your question, I guess it was pretty early on, because I just felt like I was tackling a new area, new frontiers in the automotive industry. And I think about that on a daily, but it definitely, I always remember that, I always remember that context of, there's not many of us. So all of us might be in the history books someday.
There's so many negative things that we sometimes spotlight, right? Being a female or being a female of color, but there are some pretty cool aspects to it as well, right? Because it's
Yes.
not normal right now, and so you're doing something special.
Yes, yeah. And we work in a great, fun industry. It's why I want to recruit more women to this
Yeah,
business. It's
agreed.
important work. It's relevant, to most people in the world, vehicles, cars. And so, yeah, but it's so interesting you asked me that, because I just have never thought about it. But I guess it was very early on. Definitely.
Good.
Yeah.
Um, so do you ever feel that you have to be more or extra because of your like race and or your gender? And if so, how have you like reacted in those situations?
Yes, the answer is yes. Is that, while I don't dwell on it on a day-to-day basis, being different, representing your entire community in organizations from either a gender standpoint or a race standpoint has pressure that you don't really think about. And so I credit it in some ways for my drive, that whole competition of like, I'm not going to lose, I'm going to succeed. But I definitely have felt like I can't trip. I cannot trip. I'm running and I cannot trip, because if I trip, that
Everybody's
might be it
watching.
for me. And whether that's real or not, I think some of that is like perceived and some of that is real.
Mhm.
but that definitely, there is a pressure. And so it's driven me. I think it's driven me as I've matured in my career now, trying to settle into I'm enough. Like I've done enough. I can look back now in the history of my career and the different companies where I've had consistent success and say, I've done enough. And I don't have to be on the have that pressure of like, you have to kill it at every single moment. I'm trying to settle in to being like more vulnerable about my weaknesses, about my fears, accepting failure, all those things, like not being perfect. But I do think that we have been conditioned in some ways. It's not my fault. That's kind of the conditioning
Yeah.
of working in a male dominated industry or working in an industry where there's not as much diversity at any given time.
Yeah. Makes sense. I want to talk about WOCAN some, right? So I've heard you before speak and talk about, you created WOCAN or you founded it with a few other ladies, Patrice Banks, Amanda
Yeah,
Gordon, and Erica Wells, right? The
yeah.
four of you came together in 2020. And whose idea was it? Was it you? Did you reach out to these other ladies? Were the four of
I
y'all
would love
talking?
to take full credit. But I don't know. I feel like it kind of organically happened. I mean, it was interesting. So we had all known each other,
Okay.
some of us more than others. We had interacted. Let's say, Erica and I saw each other at a conference one time.
Okay.
And, when you're a Black woman on an agenda for a conference, you're like an endangered species. And so when you see one other time, you're looking at that person like, where did you come from? And that was Erica and I. We're literally looking at each other like, where did you come from? Amanda and I met kind of in similar ways. I was at a conference speaking, she was in the audience. And so Patrice, I had seen and was just like, wow, a Black woman running a service repair
It's not
shop. And
well.
so, yeah, you don't see that very often. And so we had all kind of known each other in that way. When 2020 happened, the world was turned upside down with COVID. Then we had George Floyd that happened, a few months after that. And so it was just this crazy time. But what had changed for me in terms of my identity in the automotive industry, see, I had talked about women issues for many years before that. I was a part of Women in Automotive as a board member. I was marching on all the women's issues. But what I never touched was my race, because that was a lot more controversial to touch upon.
Mhm.
People, I don't know if I want to go there. It's like talking about religion. And so I had avoided it because it was safe for me to avoid it, right? To be in the automotive industry, I wasn't going to touch something controversial. And then George Floyd happened, and all of a sudden there was this piece of me, and being Black mattered more to me at that moment than being a
Mhm.
woman, right?
Yeah.
Like that
Yeah.
part of my identity was the most important part. It was the concern in my life. It was something that was at the forefront. On top of that, the industry was talking about race relations, like for the first time. Automotive groups I saw make posts and OEMs. And so I almost felt I had the permission now to address that aspect of my identity. And so we got together just randomly on a call one day, and
Mhm.
we all were expressing our frustrations and talking amongst each other as founders about things that we would never talk to our colleagues about because they
Mhm.
just couldn't understand. And in that moment, we were like, you know what? Like, we actually need this network, because we could talk about women issues with certain groups, and we can talk about, but from a race standpoint, we can't talk about our full identity. And we also felt like within automotive, there were groups that focused on women, there were groups that focused on minorities, but women of color were kind of slipping through the cracks in both of those groups.
Mhm.
And so we decided to launch it, and we really launched it for ourselves to have a network, to have safe discussions, to give each other advice. We thought there would be 30 women total, and 2 years later, we're at 600 members.
Isn't it
Uh,
crazy?
Right. So it's provided us a level of hope, because I think sometimes when you're the only one in an organization, and in most organizations I have been, you kind of assume that your organization, the rest of the automotive industry is like that. Like there's no one else out there like me. And the reality is that while there's not enough, we're only 6% of the automotive industry, we do exist. And
Mhm.
so WorldCan has been just a great opportunity to bring these women together, to have these discussions, but also to engage with our allies. We actually have ally members that are women, white women, that are men, who also want to learn and want to connect as well. So it's really been a gift on both sides, from women of color and also engaging with our allies.
Yeah, that's awesome. When race and these conversations came to the forefront, there's kind of some conflicting feelings on it because one, you want to get excited because, right, like people are recognizing, people are
Right.
talking, and you see, speaking of allies, you see people that say, I might not have experienced this. This might not be my reality in life, but I am on your side. And then the other conflicting emotion is when you see people who really hid their hatred really well,
Yes, yes.
right? Like, because I feel like you saw a lot of that.
Oh my gosh. 2020 was just a revelation. And it was also, I mean, there was a lot of pain there too, though,
Yeah,
for
yep.
me, because I had navigated automotive. And the truth is, like, I had built a lot of connections with people that looked different than me. And
Mhm.
I had made it at a high level. Like, I can't complain all day about my automotive career. I've been very blessed despite some challenges. And so in that moment, all of a sudden, I just felt more on my own for the people that I had marched with other women.
Mhm.
And I remember when we launched WOCAN, I have never received so much like hate emails and social posts in that time of launching WOCAN. And so I had to really come to grips with the fact that, me talking about my women issues was much more acceptable than me ever talking about any challenges I've had with race. And I've had to kind of be okay with that. Be
Mhm.
okay with people not necessarily understanding, and that's okay. But I've also been very thankful to be able to have these real discussions with many of my white colleagues in automotive to really help them understand where we're coming from. It's not necessarily like complaining all the time, but there are some real truths and realities. One example I typically give is that, in the automotive industry, there's about 1,000 dealerships owned by women, which is not enough, right? 1,000 out of what, 18,000 dealers are owned by women. That is very low. Well, you might not know that of that 1,000, 70 are women of color. I like I said, I'm all about the women issues. I'm going to be in women's groups and I'm going to support that. But I also think it's important for us to be intentional and be focused sometimes.
Mhm.
Because if we're only talking about women, but we're not dissecting other identities and,
Yeah.
and challenges that are different, you're going to end up leaving some behind.
Yeah, for sure. So since you have started WOCAN, like what's inspired you the most?
Yeah, I think, so there's a couple things that we focus on when it comes to WOCAN. And the very first thing is hope and inspiration. If you can't see it, then you can't be it. And a lot of our members are the only ones in their organizations. They're the highest ranking women of color in their entire organizations. And so that can be a very lonely thing. You just think you're by yourself. And so we try to get stories of women at OEMs, at dealers that have made it to GM, at suppliers, at all sectors of the automotive industry to show that despite the challenges, it is possible to navigate to the top of the automotive industry. So hope is a big part of it. The other part of it is the network. We talked about, like, one inspiring thing is just me meeting a Latina woman that owns a service repair shop.
Mhm.
Didn't know one prior to WOCAN. Meeting these women in different sectors that I didn't know existed. Having these conversations and meetups where I can have real conversations about our challenges. And then also education and resource. Like, how do we level these women up? Because what we know is that working in the automotive industry, you can attract diverse talent, but
Mhm.
keeping them is a whole different story. And what
Yeah.
we find is that diverse talent oftentimes gets burnt out. They don't feel like they have the playbook, and I didn't feel like I had when I joined the automotive industry. just even like from a gender standpoint, from a culture standpoint, I'm learning this playbook of the corporate world. And how do you navigate it? And what are the right things to say in meetings and things like that? And so we're trying to give education, workshops, to help our members level up, but also resources. We give scholarships for entrepreneurs. We're trying to give money to start new businesses.
Mhm.
And so all of that are ways that we're being very intentional in not only offering hope, but also giving like tactical resources that help them navigate their career and have longevity in the automotive industry.
Yeah.
So my hope, I guess I didn't answer your question though. My hope, I mean, the hope is just looking out. We had a luncheon in October and we had 80 women of color in this luncheon, and we actually had some allies as well. And I have never been in a room in automotive in which there was more than 5 of me. I literally in my 25-year career. So that inspired me. Like it was like, whoa, this is like a historical event. And so I want to figure out, how do we take what we've done with WOCAN and how do we insert it within the automotive industry? My job this year is to replace myself. Like I don't want to be the token on all of the panels and all of the events.
Sure.
Like I actually want to take some of our WOCAN members who are super talented, have amazing stories, and like pull them up and get them on those stages. Like that's absolutely my goal.
That is what it should be. Build and develop, right?
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yes.
Because then you multiply. That's
Yes.
awesome. So I know you're not in a dealership, but you are in the automotive space. So what are some things specifically that dealerships could and or should do to create a culture of like inclusion for women and for women of color?
Yeah, they're very similar. If we were to talk to any group, right? We're talking about the youngest generations. Like the equation is somewhat similar. But let's talk about attracting first. Attracting talent. We have to be very intentional about that. So, for example, if I come to your website and I only see certain pictures, I see the same person, I only see men, or I only see one race, like that is sending a signal to applicants, even to your customer base,
Mhm.
about the culture of your organization. So I think we have to be very thoughtful about that. We have to be thoughtful about even sharing stories of our diverse talent. I really encourage that you have, every company probably has a few diverse people within the organization, I would hope. And sharing those stories, particularly when that person's in an area that is typically very male dominated, the technician side, as an
Mhm.
example. Like if we have a woman in that as a technician, like we want to share that story and help her really use her story to inspire others to really apply. We talk about, the culture. You brought up something that's very important, is like once we recruit someone in, how do we get them to stay? And I think it's about leaders being very aware of the people in the room, the voices you're listening to, who you're taking ideas from. One of the things I do when I'm in a meeting and I hear people brainstorming, there's always the people that talk all the time. But when I notice that someone's quiet, I oftentimes will either call on them or I'll ask them, like, Julie, do you have any new ideas? Because as women, or when you're the only one, it is very easy to be intimidated. So I think as leaders, we have to be very intentional to create an inclusive environment. And to me, that's like making sure the right people are in the room, that the voices are being heard. The other thing I would say to really create a great culture is to have really a policy that is very clear on what's acceptable and what's not acceptable in terms of behavior. One of
Mhm.
the mistakes I think I've seen dealers make over the years, and I've worked with them as my clients for years, is that there was no line in the sand on what's acceptable. Meaning, if I have a superstar salesperson who's toxic, who messes up my culture, but he's selling 60 cars a month, I'm going to keep him on the staff. That kills culture. And so we have to make decisions up front on what we're willing to accept in terms of behavior and what we're not willing to accept. And that has to happen up front. It can't happen in the moment when someone messes up and they say something inappropriate, they offend people, and now we have to make the decision whether we're going to get rid of them or not. Because I think once we set that culture up front of what we'll accept and what we don't, and we actually enforce it, it creates a safer environment for everybody to work. And then lastly, I think we have to rethink the work environment. When I think about the dealership space, one of the things that have prevented women from working is work-life balance, the hours, the environment in terms of having to be there all the time. But the reality is we're in a new world now. And while we attribute that to women, the younger generation wants work-life balance too.
Yeah.
Almost everybody does now. So we have to rethink the way that we structure our businesses. And do we really need people here 7 days a week, 12 hours a day? I think the answer is no. And I think at our industry, I'm starting to see that we are evolving and trying to create environments that are conducive to the employees. And in doing that, we're going to attract more diverse talent.
That's so true. And we've got 50-ish dealerships now or locations, and they're pretty autonomous. We don't dictate what most of them can and can't do. We're trying to push down our culture that, that we want in the stores. But, some of them are super open to changing the way things always were. And some of them are still so old school that they're like, this is how I did it. This is how it has to be done. And so often that's the thought process, right? Well, I turned out okay. Well, it was okay for me. And then to your point, like, it's not just females. I sat in front of a finance manager who has a 2 and a 4-year-old at home, and they're like, I'm here 6 days a week, like open to close. I'm missing out time with my children, right? So it's not just females, right? If you have a family, if you have anything, if you have a dog, your poor dog needs to.
Yes, it's true. It's single people, it's people without kids. And I would say this generation, the youngest generation, is going to challenge us because they won't put up with it. Like they just won't. Their lifestyles, I think, are more important than even their retirement. So, like, I think the industry is gonna have to shift. And I think about even myself. I work from home every day now. I don't see my team all year long, except for a couple of days that we're in the same place. And yet I am more productive today than I ever was when I was clocking in every single day. And so that's not to say this isn't a debate about working from home and working in the office. It's just to say that even shifting the way I'm doing things, there are some huge advantages, and I am going to attract a much larger pool of employees if I have more flexible options than if it's just this way is the only way that you could
Yep.
be productive
Yep.
in our work environment.
As you know, it's ongoing debate, right? Like whether it can be done or that it totally can't be done because of
Yeah.
whatever the reason is.
Well, and what I would say is that your top performers earn the flexibility. And so I think, sometimes I have people that are like really great and you're gonna make some concessions. And so I think it's like as long as performance is there, ultimately that is what matters, right? The performance. Like being flexible does not change our expectations of performance. And
100%.
so I think that's clear. And I'm starting to see automotive retail, move in that direction of not what we did 20 years ago, 40 years ago, 100 years ago, but like a new way of interacting that is going to not only attract a more diverse talent base, but I actually think it's going to be better for our customers as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Who wants to talk to the salesperson who's been sitting there for 10 hours and now, you know what I mean? Now you're in front of them, and are you really going to get their best advisor that writes 200 ROs? Are you really going to get their best?
Yes. Yeah. And we talk about customers. It's something I kind of left out is like, why is all of this important in terms of attracting a diverse talent base? It should be because of our business and the customers.
Who do we
And
serve?
who do we serve? And so I'm not asking for every dealership in America to go and hire every type of person, right? Just to kind of hit a quota. This is more about you should do your best to represent the communities you serve. And
Mhm.
whatever that community looks like, our goals should be tied to having staff that represent them because it's going to help us connect better with the communities. We already know that, when people interact with people that they have commonalities with, they let their hair down a little bit more. They spend more money. Like that's the way it works. And so to me, it's just such a huge opportunity from a business standpoint as the industry starts to embrace the need for a diverse talent and a culture that keeps them there.
Yeah. And as far as like bringing women of color, minorities into the automotive industry, nobody goes to school and says, I want to be in the car business when I grow up,
Right.
unless, right? Unless your dad owned a car dealership
Yes.
when you grow up. But when you
Yeah.
grew up, but the reality is there's so many different roles that are available inside the automotive industry. It's not,
Mhm.
oh, I'm a salesperson, right? Like there's
Yeah.
so many different roles. Even here in our office, we have, like we have a legal team, we have a marketing team, we have an HR team, we have a
Training.
buy team, we have a trainers, we have, yeah, like all of these marketing, we have a whole marketing, you know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like all of these things that you can do. You don't have to grow up and be a salesperson, but if you wanted to, you can make a lot of money doing it,
You can make
right?
a lot of money. And what I learned in being in sales for a few years, I'm glad I did because I eventually became a sales trainer and that was really helpful. But what I learned in being in sales is like, I never considered myself a salesperson until I started doing it. And I was actually pretty good at it because a lot of it was very relationship oriented. It wasn't being this hard closer that's aggressive. And I think what I try to talk about with the next generation, which is going to be a huge focus for WOCAN over this next couple of years, which is like, how do we get the next generation in middle school to actually choose automotive as a profession? And part of that is helping them understand that, like, we're in a people business. Like, you don't have to like cars at all. You don't even have to know much about cars except if you're fixing them. But outside of that, it's actually more important for you to understand people. It's actually more important for you to even understand digital and technology and ways to engage. Like, that's actually more important than it ever has been in the automotive industry. And so if we can position the automotive industry like that, we're actually going to get a lot more diverse talent than before. And I think, it's really important for dealers like you also, the way you treat your customers is also that attracts talent. Your customers interacting with you, they're buying cars from you. Some of them might actually want to work for you at some day, but
Yeah,
not if the experience is bad. If the experience is bad, I don't want anything to do with this organization.
yeah.
And so there's so much opportunity, I think, to get people to actually choose the automotive industry. Wouldn't that be amazing?
Would be amazing, actually. You are sports, right? You love
Yeah.
sports.
Oh, I love them.
Do you play golf?
Sorry, I don't mean to laugh. Just a sore topic for me. So no, I do not play golf outside of Top Golf. I'm decent in Top Golf, which doesn't count. But no, I don't, and I don't know where you're going with this, but I will say that early on in my career, I really wanted to learn because I felt like that would help me connect with the boys.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly where I was going with it because so much business, right, is conducted on the golf course, or we're talking about our golf stories,
Yes.
or like whatever the case is, right? Um, so, so I was going to ask you, what do you think about a woman learning to golf, or just like about golf, just to be included in these conversations?
I think it's whether it's learning how to golf or just learning how to connect with the people that are around you, that is a good skill to have. So I tried to play golf and just could not get into it. It just did not work. I believe me, I tried. Um, but I think what helped me, like I'm a huge football person. I went to the Super Bowl by
Mhm,
myself a few years ago.
mhm.
And so that has been a connection I've had with many of the men that I've worked with is football. I think we can all find some commonalities in terms of the groups that we work with to connect better.
Hmm.
For me, I never turn down an invite to a happy hour or some type of work function after work,
Hmm.
even if I really didn't want to go all the time. Because in my mind, if they're inviting me, like I better take this invite, or otherwise they'll say, well, we tried and you just didn't come.
Hmm.
So I think that what you're saying here, what you're bringing up is really important, because that is the challenge of being the only one, is that you have to kind of leave yourself behind a little bit in order to kind of acclimate with whatever the majority is and find those connections. Even culturally, I had a challenge, working in environments where, I might be the only Black person. There are things culturally that, we grow up differently than others. I had plenty of coworkers that talked about skiing all the time,
Hmm.
horseback riding. These are things that I just never was exposed to. I never, and many of the Black people, I don't want to speak for the whole community, but I just wasn't exposed to. And so I'd be at these conversations at these tables where they're talking about their ski trips, or they're talking about, and I literally feel left out. Like I don't know how to connect and join into this conversation. And what do? I just ask questions. I don't know anything. I can't lend my own story, but I could ask a lot about you and tell me what it's like to jump on a horse and go fast. Tell me what that's like. And believe it or not, even when you don't have anything in common in that way, people feel good when you're curious about their lifestyles. And I think that is a way of connecting.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, last question. What do you think the future of leadership looks like, and how can we prepare for it?
Right when you were talking, I wanted to say the future is female. It just felt appropriate. But that's not exactly true. But I do think that leadership and what it takes to win and be successful is going to look different in the future. It is going to be about more of the emotional intelligence. And so there is some truth to that future is female, in
Hmm.
that some of the softer traits are going to be more increasingly important, particularly as technology takes a hold of many industries. We aren't relying as much on these like hard tactics to win, to close business. We're not relying on those as much. We're actually relying more on the soft skills, the relational skills. And so I actually think leadership is going to be about your emotional intelligence. It's going to be about your vulnerability, your openness, your transparency. And I feel really, really good about that, because that's the things that I excel in. Right? I don't know about you, but that makes me feel good that this is going to be what should be defined as a great leader, and not just the hard tactics of the past, that were very transactional and disconnected from interacting with people in a good way.
Hmm. Agreed. Totally agree. Kerri, you're a professional at this. Thank you.
I can talk all day.
Thank you so much for taking the time out of,
Yes, this was so much fun. Thank you for
yeah.
having me.